Okay, let me ask you a trick question.
Okay.
He can handle trick questions. Because of the way Nibley approached the history of the early Christian church, it seemed to me like, after reading a lot of his materials, that the entrance of philosophy into theology wasn't necessarily the cause of the apostasy, but it didn't help. Do you feel that it's time? Is it more helpful to bring in philosophy with theology like you're doing, do you think?
Well, I don't see how anybody could do theology without a background in philosophy.
Speak up just a little. Go ahead and talk.
Theology actually requires a background in logic and thinking and an awareness of a kind of social, cultural, environmental types of influences that color our thinking from the get-go. And so I don't see any way around dealing with philosophy, and I don't see any way to escape philosophy. I mean, even the view that we shouldn't engage philosophy in our theology is a philosophy. And so there's just I don't see any way to escape the issue. It's a matter of, the question is, should we engage thoughtfully, carefully, deeply as we engage Scripture, as we engage our religious traditions, as we engage our relationship with God? Do we bring our minds to it, or do we leave them out? And of course, the believer is going to bring every resource. And the devoted believer is going to do the best with heart, mind, and strength. Everything we have in our...
That is the commandment, isn't it?
Absolutely. And it doesn't say...
follow your heart, mind, and strength. Very good.
So it's important to bring the whole person to the endeavor and to do, is philosophy the cause of the apostasy? Did it just happen to be there? You've read the article I did on creation ex nihilo and how it entered into the Christian tradition. And the kind of philosophical assumptions that were made creation ex nihilo the only view that made sense to a Middle Platonist. And so they began with assumptions that were really questionable, but given their assumptions, they couldn't see any other way to go. And so if one begins with false assumptions, well, good philosophy would expose those assumptions and say, hold it, we've got to question these assumptions. On the other hand, is that therefore the cause of the apostasy? And the answer is no, they didn't have any better place to go than their own thinking on the issue. And when we go to Scripture, for instance, is the text self-interpreting? And I'd say there's not such a thing as a self-interpreting text. So what we do is we bring ourselves to the text. We then have an interface with the text where a person is writing from a different culture, different place, different language, and expressing in the best that they can do in language. So we have this kind of expression which is already in the medium of language. We bring ourselves to it with our own assumptions. We get a meaning of two worlds. So we get a new creation in that interaction. It's never just the original text, because there's no such thing as just an original text without somebody who's reading it.
Okay.
And so there's always this relationship. And so, the believer coming to the text is going to bring the best interpretive skills, tools, and everything that they have. It's not merely in interpreting Scripture, but also one's own experience in relation to God and our Father, and how do we make sense of that? And so, there's no way to escape philosophy, in my view. Philosophy, as I said here, the common phrase among Mormons is it's the philosophies of men mixed with Scripture.
I've heard that given to me several times. That's why I was asking.
And it's as
how
if,
do you respond to that?
Well, it's as if there is this pure, untouched by human message in the Scriptures, and that the minute we begin to think about it carefully, we ruin it, right? Well, that's just, in my view, nonsense, because first of all, in Mormonism, we don't believe in some kind of infallible, inerrant text. It already begins in a human language. It's already an interpreted message of the experience of the revelation that's being given. And so what we have never comes to us pure and untouched. It's already touched by human conceptuality, human language, human discourse in a particular culture, time, and place where what they're discussing will have a particular meaning because of that. And then we've got to interact with that from where we are, from our time, place, culture, language, and so forth.
So we might be having an interpretation upon an already cultural interpretation.
Well, of course.
Obviously,
every Scripture that we know of bears the marks of its culture, time, and place. And, the worldview, for instance, of the Bible is not a modern worldview of quantum physics and modern relativity theory. They had they saw a universe with pillars holding up the heavens, and it looked like a plate holding the stars in place. They were very good empiricists. From where they stood, that's what it appeared to be. It appeared the Earth was at the center of things. It appeared that, if you went far enough, you'd just fall off the edge, that kind of thing.
Because there really is an edge with the horizon.
Of course. But they were being
Okay.
empiricists. They were relying on their experience and saying, given my experience, what makes sense to me? Nothing wrong with that, but their experience was very limited. So is ours. And we've
True.
always got to keep in mind that we also come to a different text from a different time and place, given our own horizons, our own limitations in seeing. And what it really, I think, counsels is humility.
Keep talking.
Yeah, it simply counsels us to be aware of our limitations in grasping and knowing the truth. And especially given our scientific culture, to be aware of the limitations of science, the scientific method, and the kind of arrogance that if this isn't science, it doesn't mean anything. On the other hand, the most valuable things in human life are not even susceptible to scientific investigation. For instance, my relationship with my children and my wife, and whether I truly love them. What kind of scientific matrix would you try to stuff that into to make sense of it? And yet, you see what I'm
okay.
saying? So
Okay.
not everything is amenable to
So
science.
is it realistic to say that religion does deal more with the emotions as opposed to reality of science dealing with what's out there for real?
That's too reductive. In fact, what science demonstrates is that without emotion, we can't make choices. We can't even think rationally without feelings. They go hand in
Say
hand.
that again.
Rationality
can't
requires
think-
feelings.
Rationality requires feelings.
It requires
I've got someone I'm
emotion.
going to quote that to. So.
Yeah. Well, Antonio Damasio, Oliver Sacks, who are neurophysiologists, have demonstrated. For instance, they had a group of people who had some brain damage in an area that affects their ability to have emotion and to intertwine their emotional states with their cognitive states. They couldn't make any decisions. They were completely so. The reality is that without the emotions, without the feelings that we have no way of evaluating what's better, what's not, making any decisions at all.
So when someone tells me, as a Latter-day Saint, and we've all heard this,
Of course we have.
that you are relying on feelings instead of say like an objective reality
First of all,
based on history or
Right.
archaeology or whatever discipline they bring in. They are accusing us constantly of saying, "Oh, you're just feelings and all."
yeah,
It's not the idea of just feelings.
Well, no, the answer to that is, first of all, you're doing violence to what I'm expressing to you that I've experienced by reducing it to mere feelings. That's reductive. And it's ridiculously reductive because it doesn't begin to get at the reality of what we're talking about in terms of our religious knowledge. Does it include feelings? Yes. Does it include clarity of knowledge in the mind and heart? Yes. Does it include a simple being in knowing and knowing that we know? The answer is yes, but it's not mere feelings. That is entirely reductive. It's not fair, and anybody who would try to reduce the experience of that doesn't have a clue what they're talking about in terms of the experience of knowing the Latter-day Saints in general, I believe are talking about. At least I know I'm talking about.
That's true. Yeah.
And to speak and say,
Yeah,
well,
you
you're
would
not
know.
in touch with objective reality. Well, what kind of objective reality is there? As if there were a reality that we knew about without being there as part of that reality? There's no objective reality in that sense.
That brings in quantum pretty quick, doesn't it?
Yeah, plus-
in that regard.
Yeah, I mean, what
The observer.
kind of reality would there be unless it were included within the scope of our awareness of it? What would it mean? And I would quickly get to a kind of Kantian distinction between noumena and phenomenon. That is, what am I experiencing, this objective reality out here? When I, for instance, see you, what am I seeing? What's really happening as light is bouncing off you?
He's seeing the backyard professor. Okay, sorry.
No problem. Light bounces off of you. It hits my retina. The retina takes and translates the photons that hit it into photoelectric energy. That gets translated in the cells to photochemical energy. It then gets conveyed along a line of cellular transformation and neural information, crosses in the brain to go to the visual cortex, right? And then my visual cortex retranslates that in terms of the photochemical electric translation that it's made, and I'm calling that objective reality because it's already been translated into all kinds of different kinds of
Oh,
information.
how
that we can
interesting. And it's different with the colorblind person.
Exactly. What?
As opposed to...